Hello, everybody. All right. So, how many heard something that stretched their brain a little bit? I think that's part of David's calling, is to stretch our brains to irrecoverable proportions. Anyway, it's been good, hasn't it? So I just ordered that clip that you made for the Baptist hospital. I said, Joe, I want you to give me just that clip. I want to send it to him personally. Anyway, I thank God for David and Kim Martin. They are wonderful friends, and I just thank God for the influence they've had throughout the world and here at Glad Tidings and on me. And I know you feel the same way. Let's welcome them back to the stage for the exciting conclusion of Let Us Blow Your Mind.
All right. Wow. Excellent.
Thank you.
So good to see everybody back. And I'm super excited about the afternoon session because, you know, the whole point of us getting together is we got to be in this together. This is an us problem and how it got built, and it's an us problem and how we're going to take it apart. It's an us problem and how to put it back together in a way that's much better. And I thought it'd be good to kick off. You know, this image behind us is interesting. I'm fascinated by the fact that for some reason these animals that have figured out how to do something that all the craziness of what we call science can't begin to even put together. These amazing beings who have an intelligence to work together. Where ironically, and I know, you know, for the patriarchy, this is going to come out really bad, but, you know, the whole thing is about the queen. And you know, and it kind of sucks to be a guy in their world, you know. But what's really cool about the story of the bees is that if you look carefully at the geometry, there's a principle that a lot of us don't really know anymore. And the principle that we don't know anymore is the principle that in acoustics we call cymatics. Cymatics is the natural resonant shape of a frequency of life. And my favorite story of all of this is something which I love to say in public because it just baits all of my haters. So I figure, why not? Do it again. Yeah, do it twice. Why not? Give him more to go after. You know, most people love to go down the rabbit hole of how evil the Masonic traditions have been in the world. Most people don't know that the reason why a lot of those traditions were formed was during the Dark Ages, and specifically during the period of the Inquisition. People of different faiths needed to be able to find a place to get together, and they needed to be able to share ideas. And they needed to do it without being accused of being heretics and getting killed. And so an enormous amount of the secret societies, including then the Masons, who were the people who did stone architecture and building and everything else, when they got together, what they were doing was they were sharing insights from multiple cultures under the secrecy of a protected space. So it wasn't some sort of dark, you know, Prince of the Dark Lord kind of thing. It was just people who needed to share information. And I find it fascinating that the most sacred spaces that we see in the Christian tradition on earth, which are the ones that are most likely to revile the Masons, were built by, are you ready for this? The Masons. Kind of interesting. The people we love to hate are the ones that built us the best cathedrals. They built us the best places of worship. They built us these amazing things. But there's a very interesting study that was done, and I encourage you, if you're bored one night and you just want to go down a very fascinating little, didn't know that was possible. There was a study done not long ago where a woman decided to record the sound of silence inside of cathedrals. And so what she did was she set up very sophisticated recording equipment inside of Cathedral and just recorded silence. Nobody there to influence it, just put a tape recorder in the middle of the room, hit record, and silent. And then take the recording of silence and play it back to the silence and record what comes out of the playing of silence to silence. And ironically, the third time you do that, the music of the building could be heard. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If you take the acoustics, a speaker, and you put a metal plate above the speaker, and you pour sand across that metal plate, and you play the silence song back to the silence, the shape that is formed by the vibration of that silence matches the shape of the stained glass window in the church.
Whoa.
Yeah, I love, what? Yeah, because now I'm obviously part of the dark underworld of the Masonic tradition because I'm actually saying something nice about the Masons. But here's the interesting thing. Think about what I just said. Think about exactly what I just said. And we get into these beautiful stories of beginnings and endings, which are where we get trapped. The resonant frequency that was captured inside of that structure had a vibratory frequency. And that's a combination of the stones that were there, the shape they were cut, the way they did the roof architecture, the angles of everything, the curvatures of all of the buttresses and everything else. All of those things taken together formed the shape of a container in which resonance would happen. That resonance was designed to make sure it communicated with itself to form a particular image. But think about the paradox that I just shared with you. One of the last things that goes into the church is the window, right? So how would you build a building and then put a window in the building and have the window match the sound that could only be generated after the window was in place?
How?
Isn't that interesting?
It is.
That's a very fascinating question, which would suggest that there was an awareness that people had where they could actually design the resonant frequencies of reality in reality. In other words, these people that we love to hate had the ability to listen to the sounds of the divine so that when you walked into a cathedral, it would elevate your spirit even if you didn't have any faith. Why during the Dark Ages? Why during the Middle Ages? Why during the Ages of Enlightenment? Why were cathedrals a sanctuary? Well, they were a sanctuary because you could walk into them and you would feel your spirit relax. You would feel your spirit be uplifted. But that sacred space that they created was actually a sacred space that spoke to itself. The architecture spoke into the silence spoke into the architecture, and together those two things converge to form the path to light. Does anybody hear something that I just said?
I heard it.
We take...
Is that a church?
No.
That's a lot of churches.
Any of the cathedrals that you and I know. This is a fascinating reality. And the reality comes back to that definition I said about what dominion could have meant if we hadn't translated it to be the boot on the neck. Life giving rise to the path to light. Right? So what is that? That's the cathedral. It's the form. It's the shape. It's the rocks, the mortars, the wrought iron, the glass, everything else is nothing more than the invitation of life energy to lead you to light, which is the reason why, not surprisingly, the window was the object of that light of the divine. So did these evil groups know something we didn't know?
Yes, they did.
And did they, despite the fact that many of them were rounded up and executed as heretics, did they potentially not only know something we didn't know, but did they offer themselves in service to people who one day would walk in those cathedrals and go, oh, pretty window. Oh, pretty architecture. Oh, pretty organ music. And not have the wisdom to sit in the silence of the genius of the universe.
Do they not feel, I feel better in this?
Oh, they do, and still kill the people who do it. And this is the paradox, because one of the things that you'll find as you go down this pathway is that a lot of what Kim and I have shared in the morning session is heretical. It is. Because it challenges the status quo. It challenges a worldview. It challenges the narrative. Kim is supposed to be, just the woman on my arm, right? That's what, no. You know what? If I ever even was dumb enough to propose that, shortly thereafter, I would have a very sharp object piercing, I don't know, about the third rib bracket. And, yeah.
I went straight to the top,
I would
baby.
suddenly be bleeding out or, something. We're proposing in this conversation a simple thing, which is if there is a redemptive story for humanity, we have to redeem our story. Mm-hmm. You can't get there fixing a broken story. We're not talking about repairing a thing that's broken, because the thing that's broken, we want to see break. We want this system gone, because this system isn't built for humanity. It is not built for our better experience. This system is built to enslave. And what we would love nothing more is for at least 1 or 2 or 10 or 15 or 30 or 500 of us to go ahead and unlock our own shackles and go, oh, you mean we don't have to live that way? And the reason why I think that's interesting is because the picture behind me. The bees don't have this problem. Look at the pattern. Perfect hexagons. You know what else is a perfect hexagon? Star of David. You know what else is a perfect hexagon? The resonant frequency of carbon when carbon interacts with light. You know what else is a perfect hexagon? Everything in the universe. Water, anything that has to do with life is a perfect hexagon. You know what bees don't have to do? They don't need this memo. They don't need this conversation. They don't need it at all, because they've realized a couple of essential things. The universe is abundantly provisioned for them. They provision in excess of what they need, which is available for the sharing with others, including my peanut butter toast in the morning, which is awesome. And every single thing about the way nature is designed actually has the simatic principle of saying if you live according to nature, you are going to see patterns emerge. And the patterns that you see emerge are not going to be patterns that are random, dissociated, anything else. They're going to be symmetrical. Ironically, they're going to be hexagonal. It's the way nature is. When a snowflake falls, it's a hexagon. Every single time, it's always a hexagon. When water crystals form, it's a hexagon, whether you like it or not. Whether you see crystals form, they're hexagons. They just are. And people go, oh, well, the number 6 we were told to hate. Okay, play that out for a minute. How many times were you told to hate a thing so that you didn't look at it? How many times was the story we were told to hate the story that if we examine more closely, we'd realize, oh, we were told not to look at a thing so that we could be fooled into believing that there's not a thing we could explain. And I don't know, why is it that a lily has, oh, that's right, 6 petals? And why is it that Jesus would go to the trouble of saying, consider the lilies? You can't make this up, people. You can't. I mean, the evidence is literally somebody with a 2x4 bashing the back of your head going, I told you. I told you. It's simple. I told you. And we go, I'd love to figure this out. There's nothing to figure out. This is about observing. This is about participating. This is about recognizing that the moment you understand that you open up the aperture of your thoughts so that you can hold a new idea. The flow-on effect of that idea is not a possibility, it's a certainty, which is the first baton handoff I have for Kim right now. Kim, what's the flow-on effect of things?
What do you mean? The flow?
Well, what you just said you wanted to talk about.
Oh, okay, that. You needed more guidance. I had a really interesting experience just then, which I won't tell you the punchline of. I like to talk to people about, so a lot of people will talk about and quite easily be able to get their head around, okay, so I've got a genetic lineage for heart disease and it's in my family, and so I may or may not get it, but that's all fine. People can actually think, get their head around that. It's a physical thing, and it may express or it may not, but I've got to be more careful because I might get the heart disease. Okay, so if that can flow on and everything's energy and everything's a potential, then what about emotional things? So if you're not, say dealing with your emotional thing, it doesn't go away. Your physical thing doesn't go away. Like everything is a potential thing there happening. And I knew as a really young child, which is quite bizarre, as about an 8-year-old, asking questions about asking about the women in my family and seeing a pattern that women were, and some men too, there was this abuse was just proliferated
Prevalent,
through
yeah.
everywhere.
Did you say patent?
Pattern. A pattern, yeah.
Yeah, and mainly it was through, as I said, also all types of abuse and stuff like that. But what would happen is no one, even my mother, was never able to navigate that and actually stop and sever that energy anymore. They would get to the point where they would either get cancer, die, as in suicide, or breakdown. And I said, and I knew, and I said, I'm going to break that genetic thing. And which was an odd thing to think. And so I'd ask a lot of questions. And as I said earlier, I didn't even know the extent of abuse that I had experienced. And so obviously, as I said, I found out a lot of things about my family that weren't so pleasant. And I had an opportunity, this is a very important point and thing to look at. If you find out something about someone in your family, a hideous thing, you can obviously choose to, or anybody, you can either choose obviously revenge and be justified in it because they did all this kind of thing, or you can look at a different kind of way. And I had an opportunity for I could have gone down the path and seek revenge, gone to the police, all the different things, outed the person, blah, 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 blah. And David was awesome and said, I'll support anything you do in that moment. And I had to face that, family members and things. And the person knew that I knew just by a look in our eyes. He thought, shit, she's remembered. And I could have in that moment told all the family what happened and exposed him in the town that he was in. And but I watched him, and I watched him fumble around with grandchildren trying to build kites, and there was knowing how I feel into people, there was remorse and things like that. And I looked at him and I thought, if I did that revenge thing, that energy, I may as well kick a drunk person in the gutter. And I would then feel worse. I would actually feel worse about doing that than actually the original events. That was just not an option, and I couldn't do it, and I would have never been able to live with myself. That was just not okay. And then I thought, and then I have sisters and brother and a daughter, and I thought, no, by keeping this energy going, it's not severing it. So you've got to look at the bigger picture of the energy as well. It's not just saying, well, it's not going to happen to my daughter now, which it hasn't. She's the first generation that's ever happened for not having any abuse. So you've got to look at the big effect of everything. If you're going to stop an energy or sever it or transform it, It's got to be done in the human factors, I feel. So there was compassion, that's a huge one. And, you know, I'm still learning the forgiveness thing, and not in the fact that I can't forgive someone. Sometimes I just think I'm not some superpower that can go around forgiving people. So I'm kind of trying to get my head around that one. It's more like allowing that to be an experience and a learning thing. I don't think the forgiveness kind of comes in. It's like, how does that serve? And it was just energies that need to break to bring forth a better humanity. And how can you handle things and rise and be the better person? It doesn't mean I didn't feel awful. Like, there was many times I cried because I had to grieve a lot of things. So you got to feel and don't fight that. But I also wanted to show my daughter a different way as well. And David talked earlier about the connection part, that we're all connected. Don't lose sight of how powerful it is to actually know what you do has an effect immediately on your family and the bigger whole. And a great example of that is also whatever I do, without fail, an obvious plays out in my daughter. Like, it's insane. So another example is she wasn't owning her magnificence. She wasn't owning who she was. She wasn't owning her voice. She wasn't owning her beauty. She was still stuck in, like I was, the skinny, unattractive kid that was teased. And so she was settling for men that were not treating her well. No matter what I did, it would kind of fuel it. Because she's also in that age where it's that push-pull. She's a teenager, so some days I can say everything and be amazing, and the next day, you know, I'm listening to you. It's, you know, we're very close. But, you know, that's how nature works. They're trying to be independent, so some days it works, and some days it doesn't. I think we all know that. And so I thought, she's being a mirror of me. I walked away and sat with her, and instead of trying to sit with her and, you know, so, Sienna, what are you doing? And then she'd go, and she'd defy me more with this little face on, and I think, okay, whatever. And then I walked away, and I thought, what am I not doing with myself? And it was at that period where I was thinking, you know, do I want to speak? What is my value? What is I need to own who I am. And, you know, I was going through, at the same time, my own self-worth issues, just in its next version. And I really, really looked at that and did some work on that, and just got humbled around it. And then in that space, hang on, I saw a photo of Sienna on the wall, and she'd had her 18-year-old senior photos done, and she looked like a supermodel, like stunning, but she couldn't see it. It was like, so take that photo off the wall and walk upstairs. So I knocked on a door, and she opened it, and I said, look at you. And I said, this is you. And I said, I really want you to look at you. And I said, and it's all these things rattled off about how amazing she was. And I said, when you forget, I want you to remember that this is you. And she just burst into tears and hugged me. And then she left that guy. And it was just fantastic. Yeah. And she's then attracted in a different guy who was saying what she thought was extraordinary things were just normal things, like, you know, she said, I'll come back and celebrate your birthday with you. What can I get you for a present? He'd go, just you being here is a present. And she'd go, like, just beautiful things a man should say to a woman and be respectful. And she'd had the opposite. So she was mind blown by this, you know, a person being a kind, beautiful man, because she'd risen her frequency. So instead of the dense frequency, so to speak, energies coming in, they bypassed her because she was here. So the nice guy met kind of the nice guy. And a great example just happening now, which was so mind-blowing at lunch, we were in there. She's not tuning into this at the moment. She would be still asleep because she's on holiday and she sleeps until afternoon. But she obviously got up earlier, but she's still not. I didn't send her a link or anything to this. I opened up my phone and she said, I'm hearing you, Mum.
For me, the reason why that's important at this phase of this conversation is a lot of times we have a bad habit of setting the bar so stinking high that we decide that there's nothing to do because there's too many things that are wrong, too many things that are broken, too many things that, they are doing, too many things. And we overwhelm ourselves with the impossibility of the biggest challenges that we see out there, and we go, I can do nothing about it, so... And then you pull the plug on the effort and you just go back to, I'll put up with it. And what I really love about the conversation that Kim just shared with you and the experience she just shared with you is that's how simple it is to change the world. Truly, that's how simple it is. It is not we're going to solve, the COVID scandal, or we're going to solve the state of California's tyranny, or we're going to solve... It's not going to be that. What it's going to be is 1,000 points of those moments where it turns out that we as a group of humanity start being unmanageable anymore. I love that.
Yeah.
Go ahead and laugh. Become unmanageable. Become undomesticated. Because that's exactly what's happened. The more we actually open up the aperture of our own emancipation, including our own picture of what we can or what we can't do, what we can affect or what we can't affect, the more we open up that aperture, the more we are assuring ourselves that we become undomesticated. And the reason why that's important historically is for the following reason, and I mentioned this at lunch, but I want to share it with everybody. I very frequently use the term hybrid humanity, and people get offended when I say that, hybrid humanity. The reason why people get offended is because they can't fathom the possibility that maybe you're hybridized. And the reason I bring this up is because historically I come from a long line of heretics, ironically a much smaller line than it should be because a lot of them were executed. I can still go to Zurich and I can stand on the execution block where my ancestors were drowned in the Limmat River, and I can actually look into the blackness and see where they were executed because they didn't follow the line of the Lutheran Church, so they were actually drowned. And they were drowned on the edge of a rock where there was an eddy current that was just slow enough to make the drowning last way too long. It's a cool way to die. If you're going to die, is make sure that you actually have a lot of time to think about it. And then, go to other places where my family was put in the Trückenwald Castle and tortured, where there were devices that were actually made so that you could actually break the bones of someone's hands so they could never write again, because if they wrote, they would write heresy. But you'd actually keep them alive. You just make sure they suffer, or they'd actually have sharp objects that they would screw into different parts of your body. Or in the more modern times, they have electric shocks that they put into people, and they do all sorts of other things to make sure that they send the message, thou shalt not rock the boat. Now, ironically, what that meant was that in my family lineage, to Kim's point, in my family lineage, since David Martin showed up in the port of Philadelphia in 1732, most of the men in my family were running for their lives. They were emasculated by a system that actually said, do not ask a question, do not rock the boat, do not be a heretic because it's bad for business. And if you look across the genealogy of my family in America, it's sad to say this, but my oldest brother works at the CDC in Atlanta and was part of the Ebola response and part of the COVID response. That's my oldest brother. And you sit there going, hold on a minute. You mean Dave Martin's oldest brother is actually running the racket? Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean that he got my parents signed up for the Moderna clinical trial so that they could be patient very early on getting shot. And to this day, they can't understand that maybe the stroke that took my mom out while she was driving, that actually made her crash into the back of a truck and keep her in an ICU for 6 months, and the small intestine clots that my dad has might have something to do with clinical trial 101. But they can't ask that question. They can't ask the question of why it is that every single member of the family when we were told that to come to a family reunion, you had to show proof of vaccination,
We lined up for that.
why maybe Kim and I didn't show up. Mystery. But think about what I just said. These were people who in Switzerland and in South Germany in the 1500s were heretics. They were the ones that were getting burned at the stake. They were the ones willing to stand up for their faith. They were the ones willing to fight. But because, and this is my lineage, because of the fact that that lineage was exposed to such torture and such execution and everything else, the only part of my family that was left were what? The passive and the acquiescent and all of the things that are what you are. And I have said many times, if it weren't for the violence in my childhood, which actually broke me out of the nurturing, caring, loving cycle, there's a high probability to be walking around emasculated right now. And the crazy thing is, because of what I was exposed to as a child, that exposure actually transformed and reactivated the wild type expression of my genes that said, let's bring back the heretic. And if you look across my family, I'm the only one in hundreds of people who is actually willing to speak out against this, in spite of the fact that I have people who are the heads of public health, graduated from Johns Hopkins University, in my family, who are actively involved in perpetuating the fear and the terror campaign. The point is that we as a humanity have in fact been hybridized not to actually stick our head too far above the parapet, because we're pretty sure that it works out badly for those people. And so what I'm encouraging each one of you to do is realize that the more of us stick our head out of the parapet, at least the fewer targets are singular. And now all of a sudden you go, okay, which whack-a-mole am I whacking? Because there's a lot of moles. Now, the value of this phase of this conversation, which is what we wanted to do this afternoon, is let's whack as many mole heads up as possible. Let's get as many of us popping up, so that what happens is it's much harder to whack anything if there's everything up. The metaphor I often use in public speaking, which is not endorsed by PETA, so if you're in PETA, you won't appreciate this metaphor. But you know, the first penguin off the ice cube, right, is the one that's actually the only one really taking the risk, because that's where the elephant seal is waiting to grab him and tear him to shreds. But if 5 penguins jump at the same time, all of them are safe, because the seal can't figure out what's happening. And if 10 jump in, it's a big enough splash that the seal goes, maybe they're coming for me today. Right?
Love it.
So what we want to do is get as many penguins on the ice cube as possible, and then we all jump in, and we even scare away all the seals. So that's kind of what we want to do. So I think we have a microphone. Do we have a microphone? Yeah. We have a microphone. What I'd love to do is, if you can, and listen, people, the point of this phase is really, like, ask the questions. And I don't care what the question is. Doesn't matter what the topic is. Kim and I will do our best to share our perspectives with you, but then the goal is to actually have us start thinking together about what it looks like to create a world in which it's fair to disagree, it's fair to have different opinions, it's fair to actually have perspectives that don't match up, and we can still have a constructive, beautiful dialogue that starts weaving together the tapestry of reality, so that, to close out the metaphor, the cymatics of the cathedral we build give rise to the most beautiful window. So, anybody has anything? Let's drop in. There you go. There you go, Johnny on the
Mr.
spot.
Microphone. Actually, a comment earlier, Frank Lloyd Wright has a house that the Hannahs built at Stanford.
Yep.
And they donated it to Stanford, and it's open as a museum, and it's all hexagon.
Yep.
The question is your 1500 or 16th century Swiss and German, what faith?
So, yeah, that's a great question. Many of you probably have some sort of nostalgic view, at least, of the Amish and the Mennonite, which are extremely conservative Anabaptist traditions that come out of usually, southern Germany, Switzerland, all the way up to Holland. My ancestors were among the earliest of the Anabaptist tradition, and they were, the vast majority of them, either ministers or bishops in the Mennonite church. Most famous of all, my great-great-grandfather, Bishop Jonas Martin, was the one famously who led the division of the church between the conservative and the liberal version of the church. And he was the bishop that actually was the one that has kept the horse and buggy Mennonites going to this day. He was a extremely cruel man. I talked about the absence of masculinity. His version of masculinity was cruelty. And that broke my great-grandfather and my grandfather and my father. So he stands out, ironically, as one of the people who you would mistake to say, well, he was powerful. He wasn't powerful, he was cruel. And there's a big difference, and we need to be able to call that out. There's no acceptance for the mistaken conflation of power and cruelty. And so it's a major distinction. But I grew up in the Mennonite church. My father was actually appointed to be he and my mother met in seminary, at the Mennonite Seminary in Elkhart, Indiana. And they were going to go on the mission field, and then a series of events took place where that didn't manifest, which was a source of great pain for them throughout their whole life. My dad was brought into the ministry in actually the Church of the Brethren, which is kind of a tangent to the Mennonite church. And so when I was a kid, we grew up between the Mennonites and the Church of the Brethren, but I refer to the religion of my parents as the Protestant Taliban. And that's the most affectionate term I can use.
Follow-up. Did the Protestant Taliban refuse the jab?
No. That's a great question. The question was, did they refuse the jab? Not only did they not, the vast majority of my very religious family insisted the jab was not only necessary, but somewhat of a divine intervention to stop the terrible tragedy of the Chinese pandemic. So, yeah, that's a bizarre thing. Other questions? Yes, over here.
It's off topic, but I was wondering if you'd speak about finances, where I don't currently have any crypto myself, but I heard one person say they thought it was going to go to $1 million per coin because banks were starting, or big companies were starting to invest in that.
Yeah.
I think I heard you earlier in the year or something. I don't know if it was something you were trying to inspire to stop something, if something didn't happen or did happen. I don't follow it that close,
Yeah.
But just overall, like the one world government, how close you think we are?
Yeah, beautiful. So I am a person who likes to remind people that there was the National Telecommunications Act that was passed after the Bay of Pigs. That means that every single thing that's transmitted across any electronic communication network is capable of, according to the law, legally being surveilled, intercepted, manipulated, controlled, and captured. If you have a question where I stand on crypto, you shouldn't have a question now. The United States government in the 1950s and 1960s established a system that said that they reserve the right to actually hijack anything that gets transmitted across a digital network, which means all of crypto. Anything that is involved with a transaction associated with an electronic transfer of data that goes on any telecommunications network is subject to erasure, is subject to capture, and is subject to loss. So how do I feel about crypto? I don't feel about it. I think that is a giant honeypot of a Ponzi scheme that is a Ponzi scheme that is going to destroy the vast majority of wealth of the people that are involved, and the people who are actually sitting in the chairs on the day the music stops are going to be the ones that become the Robin Hoods that stole from everybody else. If you're still ambiguous about how I feel about this, I was the one who in 2018 in Australia got the head of ASIO to admit that Bitcoin, and specifically Satoshi, who is the author of the algorithm to mine Bitcoin, was in fact a front for the Five Eyes, which are the intelligence agencies that include the United States, Europe, Australia, Canada, etc. And at the meeting I hosted, she made the announcement, and I quote, that the intelligence agencies have already, quote, collected all the data they need off of Bitcoin. Now, I don't know how you feel about having all of your activities surveilled. I'm not a big fan of it. But the idea that cryptocurrency was somehow the anti-establishment alternative to a central bank fiat currency is not only delusional, it's actually now, courtesy of the Australian courts, that were actually inspired by the event that I hosted in Melbourne in 2018, they've now outed the identity of who Satoshi was, as I had suggested was going to happen as a result of the thing that I outed. And a lot of people are very upset that I did that, because the mystery was supposed to stay a mystery. But the problem with mysteries, and the problem with secrecy, and the problem with non-transparency is that anything done in the dark is actually going to invite darkness. Let's be abundantly clear on that. There is no wiggle room around what I said. Transactions that are done in the light, where, to quote the American Appraisal Society, a willing buyer and a willing seller, informed of all the facts, share information and come to an equal determination of value, that's actually a transaction. If there is not a willing buyer, willing seller, equally informed of all the facts, that is the tyranny of a financial system that is lopsided and benefiting only one party. And it turns out that in every form of crypto, it doesn't matter which one it is, in every form of crypto right now, you cannot, by legal definition, have fair value. Just like with what we inject into people in mRNA, we cannot have a, quote, vaccination. Because the law says what value exchange is supposed to be, and crypto, by its definition, cannot meet that standard. Because you do not know at any point in time what the willing buyer, willing seller transaction value is, because there's no basis in reality. So the great news is crypto is a wonderful accelerant into the end times of the current financial system. I don't have a problem with it. I think that's awesome, and I'm happy that the end times are upon us. I think the central bank digital currency is a great way to accelerate even further, because if you don't trust the intelligence agencies who brought you Bitcoin, I'm sure you'll trust the central bank digital currency of the United States, because that's clearly a better alternative in no world. The great news is that you're starting to see, and Russia just announced last week, Russia just announced that they're going back to a gold reserve possibility. The Saudis, the Brazilians, most of the Middle East countries, and India have decided to go back to a reserve energy-based currency, which is a high probability that's going to hit the rest of the world. And the good news is we're going to get there. We are going to get there. The question is whether we get there in an orderly fashion or do we get there in a chaotic fashion. Which leads us to the last piece of the puzzle, which is the economic system as it is currently constructed has a date certain end. That's the beautiful thing about it. This is not prophetic. This is not Dave going out on a limb. This is Dave reading actuarial documents, which, by the way, is far less interesting than prophecy. Reading actuarial documents is boring as batshit. But let's get to what it is that we know. We know that by 2027, the statutory reserves of Medicare, Medicaid, and the associated long-dated asset programs of the United States government, the trust funds go to zero. That intersects with the fact that in 2025 and 2026, the interest-bearing note value of our Treasury actually crosses an inflection point where we actually would be paying more to have currency than our currency is worth. So in 2025, 2026, the cost of maintaining our currency exceeds the value of our currency. Now, it turns out that what that means is something that we can go back to the Medicis to understand the consequence of what I just said. The Medicis, the early bankers of Italy, were actually notorious in figuring out that before you go to war, what you do is you counterfeit a currency. Because at a couple percent, usually around 2 to 3% of the circulating currency, if you have that much counterfeit in the system, then the underlying government that's supported by that particular economy is destabilized irrevocably. Traditionally, the documentation of this research was done by the Duke of Sforza, who was a competitor with the Medicis, who actually figured out what the actual rate of counterfeit is to make sure that you can destabilize a country beyond its ability to repair itself. So I want you to hear 2 to 3%. Now I want you to hear the following. In 2026, that number in the United States will be 30%. 30% of our currency will be counterfeit. And by counterfeit, I literally mean the money that is represented in this note is legal tender will actually not actually represent money. It will represent a negative call option on the Treasury, meaning that it doesn't have a value of $1. You actually will have to pay to have the dollar, which feels like it's not $1 anymore. If you actually have to pay to have it, it's not. So we're at this wonderful place where we know that 2025 and 2026 is an architected instability moment. Now, why is that important? That's important to understand that in the history of the United States, the only way we have gotten out of having to confront this is war. Never in the history of the United States have we solved this problem with anything but war. And by the way, when I say the history of the United States, I'm including the 1778 time we did it, which we called allegedly a revolution, which wasn't. It was a masking of an indentured position, which we actually then called a revolution, which is the reason why the first Bank of the United States was formed by who? Stephen Girard, who was the opium dealer who financed the revolution. And I think somebody said we had an opium problem in the United States. Oh, yeah, that's right. We were founded by the opium trade. Every bank of the United States has been financed and wholly owned by opium traders. And we wonder why we have an opioid crisis. The reason why I'm telling you this is because this is not, once again, prophetic. Why do we see the drumbeat of war being beaten so hard right now by the government? We are supposed to be willing to accept that whether it's Israel-Palestine, whether it's Ukraine-Russia, whether it's Iran, everybody, whoever we want to have a full court press option of hitting go on a war to try to mask the fact that we are going bankrupt. And only in America can you count on the fact that every single war we've had has masked a bankruptcy of the Bank of the United States. So, what's really happening is we're trying to accelerate a global war. And don't think for a minute, and I don't care where you stand on any of these issues, I don't care if you're pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas, pro-this, pro-Ukraine, pro-Russia, whatever you are, you're in the trap. Because none of those are actual conflicts. None of them. By the way, just yesterday, the UN vetoed, against all the rest of the Security Council, vetoed continuing a ceasefire. And who did it? No, and Israel and Hamas. And the United States was the veto. Now, once again, I don't care where you are on the conflict. I'm simply saying, who the hell vetoes a ceasefire? You don't veto a ceasefire unless you want to continue the ongoing conflict in the form of a war. That's the only reason you veto a ceasefire. There's no justification for it other than if war goes away, we can't hide the bankruptcy, so we can't afford the war to go away. And so let's be abundantly clear on the fact that all of these things are actually interconnected. And the key for this conversation is by saying it out loud, we're spoiling the secrecy plan, which is the reason why I say it louder. And we collectively need to say it louder. We cannot fall for this trap because we already know what the trap is. And please understand, this is not a partisan argument. I do not support genocide in any form, ever, by anyone, for any reason. That's an absolute statement for me. That is not a, oh, I have to think about it, right? It is not acceptable to decide that there is a group of people who deserve extermination, and it doesn't matter who you are and where you are. That is not acceptable. But what we have to do is realize that when we fall into the trap of believing that somehow or another that somebody's justified and somebody isn't, it's a trap that is set for us to be distracted from what the real issue is. And the real issue is that we have a system that is illiquid and we know it. And what we're desperately trying to do is before the next election, we want to have a global war. That's what we want. And I'm here to say, let's not do that. Question from over here somewhere, right over here.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Kim, I want to say thank you for coming here and looking so beautiful in your colorful dress, because I'm a person who sees that and I am uplifted.
Thank you.
One thing that's near and dear to my heart and my team who is here with me today is education. We are working in developing models that improve education, from delivery, curriculum, teaching, business processes, you name it. So I'd like to hear what you two think about education, if you have any projects going on in that space right now.
Do you want to start with what you did as a business?
Oh, it was in the nursing KPC thing.
Well, just what the education was that you did with your patients. This is our conversation from last night.
Yeah, I thought that, but then okay. Yeah, actually, it's a really good example. When David has his turn, he has a brilliant tool using nature, which I'd love him to just slightly share with you all on that, because it's brilliant. It's called integral accounting, which I slightly mentioned before, but you know, I look forward to him sharing some of that, because that's such an awesome way of teaching. We were talking last night at dinner about, we're just unpacking a few things, and I said it's interesting, when I was really young, as a 5-year-old, I had such a calling, knowing to be a nurse, like at 5, and I said to David, this is really weird. I said, I haven't really unpacked this, and I said, there was no one around me that was a nurse, except for an aunt that I never really saw. And I said to Mum, I would love for my birthday a nurse's bag. And so she got me one from my aunt, and had real stuff in it, like real scissors, and like not plastic stuff for kids, like I had real stuff from the hospital. So I thought it was awesome. And then it was interesting too, and I said, but I didn't put them all in beds and start bandaging them all up. Instead, I lined them all up, and I had
dolls.
The dolls, and toys. Lined them all up and put them in front of the blackboard and would teach them. And occasionally I'd go, I should put a bandage on you, but I don't want to waste the beautiful things. It's like the good candles, don't burn them. Like the bag pretty much stayed untouched because it was precious. So they basically got educated with my nurse's uniform, and I got a nurse's uniform. So Mum made me one, so I thought I was just the bee's knees, just sitting there teaching the toys, which I thought was interesting. And then I said to David, you know, I went to university to be a nurse, and even when I was doing it, I was watching myself going, there's so many parts about this I don't enjoy. And I'd go out to the practical thing in the hospital, and I'd go, I really hate this part, but I love the people part. So I would love talking to them, and if you said, what were my highlights of when I was in a hospital, it would be...
Moment of confession here. Go ahead.
I would be, I'd have a good time on the weekend and stuff, and always just go dancing. Loved. I would dance most nights of the week with my friends. I had a very oppressed childhood, so I just wanted to dance. So that's what I'd do, and I'd meet boys and stuff, and then be doctors. You know, I decided, as I've said in some of my speeches, I'm never marrying a doctor. And I think that's what made them more keen, because, the one that doesn't want to be near you, they all want to be with, kind of thing. And so they would watch all the doctors, because these patients, the patients on this ward were regulars, because I was on a dialysis kidney ward, and they were all chronic, so they would be in and out. So they were like family to me. So every time they would come in, they'd go, what'd you do on the weekend? And so then I'd share everything with them. I knew all about their families, everything like that. We'd have all these great conversations, and they'd live vicariously through my stories, because they didn't have much of a life. So they lit up, and it was so exciting. Hope Kim's looking after us today. And then I said to David, that's funny. And then I was always searching for something more, like how I can kind of, something was still calling me. And then I found myself to be an educator. So I actually played out the teaching part of my experience, and then eventually had my own business, going out to the community. And I had this great business in Sydney, and I had 13 nurses working with me, and we'd do these assessments. So we'd go out to their home, visit them, and we'd do a physical health assessment. But then we would sit with them and talk to them and find out what they needed to stay in their own homes. That was my big contribution that I loved the most. But the patients, we only got to do this once a year because it was funded through the government, once a year visit, and they used to hate that because they'd go, can't you come again? And, and they'd grow me plants. They'd pick up from the conversation that we had the year before. They remembered it. They were all dressed up. They were excited for my visit, and just loved the fact that, that I would come and see them. And as I said, my greatest gift and what I loved doing was sharing things with them, like I was as a 5-year-old doing that. And I said to David, isn't that funny? I said, I don't know quite what to make of that, because, doing what you love and what you're called for. I said, but I was conflicted the whole time, and I only liked pieces of it. And he sat with it for a minute, and he said, it's interesting because the system that we have didn't allow me to do a full me. There wasn't a business or a university degree to go and spread cheer and Kimness and teach people things and be exactly what I'm doing now. This is what I love doing. And I love the fact that I know health, because I love anything about the body, humanity, like anything I can. And of course, knowing about health now serves me very well. But the components that I love was reaching people through conversations, lights me up the most. And he said nursing was the closest thing you could find to match what your gift was, like your calling. And I thought, that's such a cool way to look at it, because it was always confusing for me, because I was always then looking, going, but this isn't it. Maybe I'll try kids nursing, which there's parts of it that I love. Maybe I'll do community nursing, always kind of searching. I found David at the end of it, because I wouldn't have been able to be on the Antarctic trip that we were on, because I was an entrepreneur and it was an entrepreneur's cruise. And so I got asked to be on it. So I see how, there's great things came out of it and led me to David. But it's interesting that we still have to, there's only certain things to do, like that you could pick from. Like my daughter at the moment says she wants to be a lawyer, but you can tell that's her, after David telling me that yesterday, I thought, I can see that's the closest fit she's trying to. She's trying to have a woman having a voice and actually bringing down criminals. But there's a twist to it, because she loves unraveling clues and the humanity of it. And so she loves the psychology and the criminal minds kind of thing. And getting there and being, it's funny, getting on a stage and having a voice. She had a very oppressed voice as a kid from her biological father. And that's been a very big challenge to her. And also she carried it through for me. So my voice, so she's got a double whammy of that happening. So the closest thing she can find at the moment. And I said to her, trust in something. I said, I've just got some wisdom for you. I said, I don't think what you're going to do exists at the moment. And I said, so just study some subjects that you find interesting. And she goes, are you telling me I can learn what I want? And I said, yeah, you can, because originally she thought she wanted to be a doctor because she wanted to McDreamy or McSteamy from the, what's that show? Grey's Anatomy. Like, that was her thing. And I said, you want to be a doctor? I said, when was the last time you spoke about health or those kinds of things? And then, she started not doing well at school because some part of her realised she was incongruent with her goal to be a doctor. And I said, let's just stop, pause here. What did you do when you first moved to America? You had all these 8 months to kill. You, off your own bat, went and found an adult's university-level psychology course and a criminal investigation course. And you got perfect marks in it. And it was the first time she said, Mum, I'm smart. And I said, you always were. I said, but you've been made to study things that were never your values. And I said, it's painful as hell doing that. And you drag yourself through. So she happened to be doing at that time too subjects that her counsellor at school told her she should do to be a doctor. It was just clear. And I said, how about you go back to what lit you up? And I said, and at the moment, don't have an end result. You don't have to be a lawyer or something like that. I said, just study some subjects that make you feel happy. And so that's what she's doing.
So, what I have done in education, and I've educated everything from kindergarten all the way up through advanced higher degrees, PhDs, MDs, everything else, and I find the kindergartners most interesting and most delightful, because they actually don't have to be untrained. What I would say is this: I think education right now is an immoral profession. And I say that for the following reason. Education, as we currently understand even the word, is indoctrination. It is not the expansion of the critical mind. And as a result, I think, and Kim and I have actually had this conversation sometimes, if we had a kid right now, I genuinely would just not send them to school, because I don't think it's ethical to do that. And I would say that for 3 reasons. So I'm going to unpack the reasons. And this is the way to back into what she asked me to answer, but I'm going to do it backwards. Right now, your identity is supposed to be defined somehow by the what you do and how much of a contributor to society you are. So, well, yeah, that's part of the currency of it, but it's kind of the you are that which you have done or contributed. Okay, so in our integral accounting model, what we would say is the identity or the well-being is the definition of the what you are and the value placed on the what you are. Using the methodologies that we teach in our courses, the alchemical counterpole to that is the dimension of knowledge. So this is where the degree comes in. Knowledge, unfortunately, in our society is a credentialing, not knowledge. On the slide, if we could have the slide up again, I don't know if we could just back up one. I still use the term in that purple ball, gnosis, which is the Greek term for not knowledge in the kind of retail side of that. Gnosis in the Greek construct was that which you know through experience, not knowledge in the rote recitation kind of thing. It's that which you acquire through experience. So this is where I would say that education that is not in the context of a thing is not education, it's indoctrination. If you're not actually doing the thing, right? So if you're not learning geometry by either triangulating the movement of the stars or triangulating the distance of a tall building or whatever else, you're not learning geometry. You're learning, at best, a Pythagorean cult. But you're not learning geometry. Learning geometry is actually going, Cult. Yeah, and it is. It's the Pythagorean cult. And, well, pick your metaphor. I mean, the fact of the matter is, every single thing taken out of its applied use is indoctrination. And I mean everything. Right? We have decided, for reasons that are still mystifying, that the only way to communicate is the random pattern recognition of 26 characters. Really? For those of you who have any training in mathematics, that's lunatic. There are more thoughts than there are random combinations of those 26 letters.
They've added 1,000 emojis.
Right, but still, we're still missing the plot. Because the idea that communication comes in the form of a written expression is actually unethical. Because what it does is it makes a person like Kim, who didn't succeed in the classic school tradition, devalue the fact that her genius is expressed in art, and her genius is expressed in aesthetics, and her genius is expressed in adorning the world around her, and that's where her genius is. So she got told that she wasn't bright because she didn't excel in that particular framework. And that's what I'm saying. Anything done outside of application is not education, it's indoctrination, and we have to be really clear on that. Which means what we need to do from an education standpoint is get people back into applied learning. And I don't care where it is. If you want to learn math, Get out the measuring cups and measure how much flour and water and sugar goes into the cake. If you're going to do anything, apply it, because that's education. It also is something where you have to also get to the place of saying that education is also allowing for trial and error. Rather than credentialing, which is the currency side of this, which is the credentialed side, rather than saying, oh, you did it right, well, the bummer is if you did it right, that means you're not creative at all. Because right was adjudicated by a standard that was set. If you think back to my metaphor of building cathedrals, the cathedral should be our design of every school. Because think about what this was. The cornerstone, defined by geometry, absolutely Pythagorean, right? Edges, coordinates, location, all that. Every single one of those elements was actually the first part of a cathedral. From that, foundations were laid, walls were raised, everything was scaled, but it was all done on the form of geometry. But not geometry theoretically, a stone that was cut. That's why we called it the cornerstone. It was the reference point for everything. But the cool thing about a cathedral is the technology that was required to ultimately cap the spire at the top of the finished cathedral. The technology that was required to do that was never invented at the time that the foundation stone was laid. The building itself, as it rose, informed the technology that was required to make that thing more exquisite. Il Duomo is my favorite example. You build this beautiful columnar-looking building, and then you don't think through, yeah, but we got to put a roof on it. Now, we could all laugh at that and go, well, that's kind of dumb. You design a building that you can't put a roof on. Or it's smart. Maybe you design a building so that we can innovate what roofs are. And we wouldn't have the Capitol dome that we have in the U.S. Capitol right now, but for Il Duomo. But we wouldn't have Il Duomo but for the fact that somebody built walls that couldn't be roofed. Until there was a competition to go, how the hell do you build this roof? And then the technology of actually ribbed buttressing that was designed off of what? Does anybody remember? An egg. An egg. They went to nature. They looked at what has the ability to be frail, brittle, and structurally nearly impossible to break. And it turns out that the point of an egg is exactly that. You have this minimal thing that's almost diaphanous in its thickness, but structurally hugely capable of having strength. And you sit there going, oh, so what did they do? They actually put an egg on the roof. Now, what kind of thinking is required to do that? Not something that you could have gotten from a textbook. Because the context in which the wisdom came was a context where you quite literally had to have the entirety of the building built and then go, did anybody think about a roof? And everybody looks at each other going, that was his job. That was his job. And nobody knew the answer. Because the answer did not exist until a lateral thinking person goes, well, what about an egg shape? Which, by the way, is the reason why I never fear AI. I never fear AI. If your job can be done by AI, you shouldn't be doing it today. Seriously, shouldn't be. Don't. In fact, quit ahead of time. Be the first out the door, not the last one to have the door hit you on the way out. Because what AI can't do is it can't create Il Duomo. It can't anticipate something that doesn't have an architectural reference point somewhere in history. But the problem is, this one didn't have an architectural reference point in history, and it required somebody who could think laterally, think horizontally, think vertically, in this case, think in a spheroid way, and go, oh, how about that? So this goes to the first transaction. We got to stop credentialing for the purpose of having our identity linked to the what we do. We need to be actually then thinking about the next piece, which is the other transacting axis, which is the custom culture technology axis, we need to think about the fact that when we're training people, we need to actually move from an idea that says that we need to have these kind of scarce skill sets, which are going to be the reason why we're more valuable than the next person, and we have to get to what I call virtuous utility. What is virtuous utility? That's a very simple principle. I need to be able to bring the collective of my thought process into every single environment I go and apply it whenever I see an application. Cheryl asked me at lunch, how much of my brain do I use? The answer is all of it. All of it. There's not a single spirochete holding a single neuron together up there that's not going, please, would you stop for a minute? But that's okay, because what I do is I actually live into a world where, regardless of a question that's asked in this room, I can guarantee you that if you had a PhD expert in the field that you're asking the question in, and you had me, you'd be more satisfied with my answer. And I don't care what the topic is. Not because I'm smarter, or the pejorative that Cheryl keeps using. I'm not a brainiac. That's not what it is. It's actually the recognition that I have been the recipient of a series of perspectives that have come from my travels around the world, my conversations with people, my interactions with cultures, all that kind of stuff. And I don't forget connections that have been made in all of those different places. So what that is I'm just walking around with a lot of, to use computer terminology, I have a lot of RAM. Like, a lot of RAM. Like random access memory, got it. Yeah, it's just kind of there. I'm just wired in. But this is where we need to teach people that, once again, application is, how do you solve the problem without the tool that you thought you were going to use? That's the education piece. Right? And unfortunately, what we've done is we've educated people to deploy tools against problems. So what do we need to do as teachers? We need to take those tools away and say, solve it without that tool. Right? The minute we do that, we then open up another part of thought process. And so we alchemically change the dynamic that says education informs people how to use the tools that we're going to put in front of them so they build the things that we told them to build, which is actually what education was set up for since the 1800s, where education became, how do we make you a robot into our manufacturing process? We don't need that. That's what AI is going to do. Let it do it. Great. And then the last one is this question of the last axis that we haven't talked about, which is the commodity to value exchange axis. The interesting thing about value is up until now, and up until now for the last 275 years, what we've decided is that financial value is a function of how inefficient scarcity is managed. How inefficient. The more intermediaries I put in a system, the more costly a thing gets. Okay? So we're building a world based on inefficiency, and then we reward inefficiency with what we call money. That's how our monetary system works, by the way. You just got a PhD from the University of Chicago with that statement, because that is the sum and substance of everything you would ever learn at the University of Chicago. Managed friction equals scarcity. Managed scarcity equals enrichment of the few for the deprivation of the many. That's the way it is. But now, what happens if your job as a functioning member of society is to remove friction, is to make it more accessible, easier? What if the value that was rewarded was the person who actually achieves the utility at the lowest frictional cost? Where now my job is not to train somebody on how to make it inaccessible. My job is to say, how do we close the gap as quickly as possible? Now, what did I just blow up? I blew up literature as a subject, and I turned literature into a utility. Right? Why do I use so many references from literature? Well, I use it as a tool of communication. I don't use it as the sum of the things I've read. I've read a lot of things, that's true, but I use it as a technology to build a knowledge bridge. I'm not asking for what did that particular author say. I want to have the reference that says, that was a good way to say a thing that needs to be communicated. So literature stops being literature and it starts being technology. What is math? Math stops being math and it starts being the scale through which we can view efficiency and inefficiency, friction or ease of movement. And the minute we actually turn math into that, math no longer is the subject I can't understand, but math is something that now I go, wow, I'm really into this thing because I want to understand how to do more things in a more efficient way. And that becomes math. And do you see what happens? Every discipline that we thought we were teaching, and by the way, now the state of California will probably arrest me because I'm going to say this, but standards of learning, credentialing, performance testing, all this kind of stuff, which is a legacy of the intelligence movement of the middle of the 20th century, all of that goes out the window. All of it. All of the intelligence, everything under the proper noun intelligence. If you go back and look at the derivation of the word and why we actually do intelligence testing, all the way back to IQ testing, everything else, why is it that we actually adopted 3 criteria as intelligence? Pattern recognition, puzzle solving, and oral and written communication. But communication was the third. That's the sum of intelligence. You know what that means? Kim's an idiot. Because she would pick up a paintbrush and paint a lion that has actually generated more revenue for the fundraisers that we've done than any speech I've given. So, and that's, by the way, a mathematic fact. You get the point, right? The point is that we need to throw away these definitions that we're part of an industrial robotic society, and we actually have to say, hold on a second, who's the genius? Right? Is Kim's painting of a lion the genius that actually has melted people's hearts some places, emboldened people all over the world? You know, the number of times we walk through a place and we see somebody with a t-shirt or, you know, the leggings or the whatever else, and they're just beaming because they're energized, because they're standing with their tribe, you know, all that kind of stuff. Is that something that Dave Martin would have ever done? No, I wouldn't. You will never find a slogan that is an amazing, brilliant thing I said on women's tights. Ever. That may be the missing link. You never know. But the point is that we have to think about education now through the lens of experiential environment condition setting, where regardless of the age, we actually teach people the alchemical matrix of how the real world works, so that they understand that when they have the honey on their bread at lunchtime, right, that honey is the subject matter. And now we're going to go talk about bees and pollination and all this stuff. And every time we have another experience of life, we're going to walk through the what's the story of this story. And in that, lo and behold, we'll talk about the geometry of hexagons. Well, if you talked about it while somebody's got honey dripping off their face, do you think they'll remember that story better or worse than somebody at a chalkboard or on a PowerPoint presentation saying, "Children, the angle needs to be 30 degrees." Right? How ridiculous. Let the honey drip off their face. Let them love the hexagon. Why not? What's going to be harmed by that? That's what we need to be doing. So that's a long way of getting there, but education fundamentally has to be obliterated in its current form. And then from a doctrinal standpoint of what would be the doctrine of an emancipated population, it would be embed people in experiential learning. To drive home the last point I will make, mastery, which is a term that came out of the Masons, again, mastery is a principle that was never achieved as an effort. Listen carefully. In every tradition of the apprentice, journeyman, master, craftsman environment, whatever the thing was, You start off by learning how to deal with the matter and energy, the commodity, right? I need to know how to mix mortar. I need to know how to cut rocks. I need to know how to deal with bricks. I need to do all the kind. I need to go through the lens of the custom and culture, the scale. What are the shapes that we care about? What are the scales that we care about? Those are all custom and culture. I'm going to sit with the people who know what they're doing, and I'm going to learn by observing, and I'm going to learn by whacking a chisel one time too many, and it falls apart. I'm going to go through that process, and at one point, somebody goes, hey, you're not screwing up too much. Why don't you start at least cutting the rough stones? And we call that a journeyman, and the journeyman starts doing that. And they get really good, and they get to be the wall guy, or they get to be the window guy, or they get to be the something else, and they do all that. And then they become a master craftsman, and they do all this kind of stuff. But the master, that grand master that is recognized, is actually one person who's actually discovered, who stayed the extra hour too late. You know, did one extra flourish on the one piece of stone that became the cap of the altar or whatever it was. And that person, in the moment they were doing it, did not know they were going to be recognized as the master. But they added something to the state of the art, which is where we got the term, by the way, state of the art. They added something to the state of the art, which was recognized by their peers as transcending the state of the art. And thus they became the Grand Master. And they were invited to do something that was brilliant. And I love this. They were invited to carve an intricate, detailed carving on the back of the altar in the church. Listen to what I just said. On the back of the altar. Not on the front, not on the side, not on the doorway where everybody came and go. On the back of the altar. Why? This is the most important thing you can hear out of all this craziness. They sealed their recognition as master by carving their greatest work so that only God could see it.
Wow.
It was never, ever, ever done so that everybody else would go, oh my gosh, that's what Dave carved. No. The Grand Master was the one invited to put the most beautiful ornate carving on the back of the altar where it could only be seen by the divine. And that was your agreement with the nomination of your colleagues, where your colleagues go, you're the one. Now go into secret, and in secret, put your imprimatur, your imprint, onto the divine. What a cool metaphor. You didn't name the church after him. You know, you didn't put the building, this is Kim's church because she's the coolest, because she figured out the floweriest flower or whatever. No, you didn't do any of that stuff. You didn't do any of the showmanship. You actually put your signature, the imprimatur, on the back of the altar to say, my colleagues have recognized my contribution, and now I'm sealing that with my finest work that's offered to the divine only. Now, does that sound like a tradition we should hate? Or do you think we could learn a thing or two? That's where education ultimately goes, where we have the humility in our finest work to go, this is not for the promotion, this is not for the recognition, this is not for the I'm going to get the best retirement program or whatever else. This is when I know that my essence has shone as brightly as it possibly could shine. My colleagues have recognized it, and I'm invited in secret to seal my relationship with that identified ideal. That's how I would educate people. Is that okay? Oh, right, before you run, we'll come back to you, Lord.
Thank you. And thank you, Dave and Kim, for just the work you're doing. It's incredible. I found myself watching that EU parliamentary speech of yours with my hair standing up and just saying, thank God there's a voice in this global, this global mass. So thank you. Thank you.
Woohoo!
My question is, the Bible is very clear about uncovering the fruitless deeds of darkness, right? And as we do that, as we expose that, whether we have evidence that's lock, stock, and barrel against these people like Fauci and all these people that have manipulated public health, where does the justice come in? right? We've been trying to get the sheriffs involved. We've been trying to
Yep.
get everybody involved. Like, what is it going to take to actually get an enforcement of justice to put these people away, right? And to act, I mean, that's kind of where, for lack of a better term, where the discouragement comes from as well. I mean, we're moving the needle, but yet you see these atrocities continue,
Yeah.
even though we have the evidence. Like, what's it going to take to actually get some global or domestic enforcement of justice?
Okay. Do you want to do anything about justice, Justice Queen?
What do you mean?
Well, just, do you want to talk about justice? Because you're a big fan of it.
No, you start.
Cool. I'll go ahead and take a stab at it. I think there's a term that's used in the Bible very frequently about justice, which is the word season, which I think is interesting. I don't know why, because you would think that justice is a function that should just be an always on. But for some reason, it's often presented in seasonal terms. And so I have to reflect. And by the way, I don't know anybody who probably has to reflect on this more than me, which is I feel like I've done a pretty modestly good job, maybe a slightly better than average job, of trying to get the word out. And I've tried a lot of times to wake people up and present the information, and I would say my batting average sucks, which is measured by an outcome, which is the outcome of did we actually achieve the just outcome. You know, right now I'd say, you know, we can safely say I'm batting 0, not even 300, right? So I'm not even in the Hall of Fame. You know, I would say that Paxton's case, which is largely filed on the back of what I submitted to his office, you know, is at best somewhere sub 100. So I'm really just borderline majors versus farm team. You know, what we did in Utah, you know, was a great case, but Sean Reyes is so compromised that he didn't bring the case that he now has to bring under the law, and he still doesn't do it. You know, we have this story playing out over and over again, which then makes me reflect on something, which is if justice isn't happening, is it possible we're the problem? And I think we have to examine that. I think we have to examine whether or not the reason why what we think of as justice isn't being done is we haven't done enough repentance to be worthy of justice. And let me explain exactly what I mean by that. We have a very bad habit of pretending that there's a bad guy and that somehow or another they're bad and we're the injured victims of bad guys. I said many times, I said if we actually outed the bad guys and we had the perp walk and they were all walking down the street, we would make the mistake of thinking that we actually have solved the problem. We haven't even gotten close to solving the problem. And I think we're being protected from justice right now. You hear what I said? Protected from justice. I think that if we actually had an easy button where we could actually hit the button and lock up Gates and Fauci and Barrick and all these guys, I think we would actually be dumb enough to believe that we solved the problem. And I don't think we actually have had the consciousness to recognize that we've got some repentance of ourselves to do before we are entitled to ask for justice. Because the question that I have right now is have we done the inner examination to go, yeah, we've got it. And Kim actually answered this question a little bit with her own life experience. The just response would have been to out the perpetrator and to actually,
Get revenge, take
bring
him to jail.
visibility, have accountability, all that kind of stuff. But the problem with that is it would have damaged more in the process than it would have solved. And it wouldn't fix the problems Kim had to deal with. Kim actually needed to go on her journey of her own healing. Because no amount of getting the guy, in this case, would have solved the pain that she was actually still locked into. And there would have been no reprise from that pain by going, well, at least he's caught now. Because she would have still lived with the fact that she still needed to go through the journey, as painful as it was. She still needed to go through the journey of finding out that she was never a victim. She was never somebody who had to define her life by a past injury. She was a person who was going to emerge as a brighter light through the forge of that process. And so this is why I'm saying that the reconciliation I'm talking about is actually not light. It's not easy. This is a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to say, what did we do that contributed to this thing? And are we prepared to purify ourselves so that when we call for justice, we have a moral standing in which we can actually receive it? Because I don't think we do. And by that, I'm saying, I'm putting myself in that list, right? We are in this together, and we will only get out of it together. At some point, we have to recognize, and I'll offend everybody because I haven't offended all of you yet, but I will offend everybody now. I said observationally that asymptomatic transmission of COVID only happened in countries where the doctrine of original sin is taught. You heard exactly what I said. Okay? And I don't care whether you like it or not. Happens to be inconveniently true. If you can look at an infant and believe that that infant is evil, you are actually part of the currency that Fauci used to spread COVID. Because you are actually defiling the divine, and you're saying that your doctrine, which was invented in the 4th century, is more important than the truth that was invented at the beginning of time. So think about it. How many of us, consciously or subconsciously, are willing to believe, yeah, maybe we are pretty much defiled? And by the way, I'm not saying that we haven't been defiled. But I am not saying we are defiled. Big difference. And here's the problem. The problem is, if we weren't carrying the carrying frequency that says that you can say to somebody who's perfectly healthy, with, by the way, a disease that is only defined by symptoms, right? That's the mind-bending thing. You can be asymptomatically symptomatic of a thing that is only defined by symptoms. What? That's just ludicrous when I say it out loud, but that's exactly what we were able to do. But that's no different from what is spewed across pulpits, where a population is defined as broken, when last time I checked, even the Apostle Paul, with whom I have tons of problems, said, as in Adam came death, so in Christ comes life. And if you don't see those as co-equal, then what you're saying to me is Adam has more power than Christ. You know what's not true? That statement. But we preach it, every church around the world. And it's that currency that was used to pass asymptomatic spread across the world, which is the reason why we can inject a lethal bioweapon into the arms of children. So guess who needs to repent? We do. This is not something where we can wiggle our way out and go, well, it was the bad guys. No, we gave them the frequency that they used. And we can judge their use of it, but we better look inward and go, did we help that process move along? And that's uncomfortable, and it has to be uncomfortable. We have to examine the degree to which, when we say justice must roll down from the mountains, we better be a mountain of integrity when that rolls down. Because the minute we decide that we can blame somebody else, and I gave a speech in Germany, by the way, that didn't get seen very much. It's actually one of my favorite speeches. But I went through the 16,000 pages, no kidding, every page, of the Nuremberg trial. You want a heartbreaking thing to read, by the way. If you're feeling really positive with your life, and you want a reading list of how to bring it down a notch, read the Nuremberg trial. But I read the 16,000 pages of the Nuremberg trials for my speech in Germany. Because Germany had passed a law that said if you speak anything against the state of Germany, you're going to be arrested. So I figured I'm going to be speaking at the resort owned by Angela Merkel, because that's Kloster am See, that's where my speech was going to be. And I'm going to be speaking about Nuremberg, so that should be a pretty good target. And I decided to deliver a knockout blow in that speech. And it was amazing because what I did was I showed that every single step of COVID matches the Nazi Party's rise to power in the 1920s to the 1930s. And I mean simple things like they burnt down a city in Germany, they burnt down a city in the US. Like the sequencing was unbelievable. It wasn't even close. It was you do that, then you do that, then you do that, then you do that. So you do the anti-police thing so that you get to be the Nazi Gestapo, and you do. Every single line lined up. And I did that speech in Germany. It was freaking amazing. And my conclusion was, we don't need Nuremberg 2.0. And everybody's like, no, that's a meme. I'm tweeting it. Okay? That's fine. It's a meme, you're tweeting it, and it's wrong. Because the problem with Nuremberg 1.0 is the opening address that was made by the then chief counsel, who was a Supreme Court counsel that went over to do the opening of the Nuremberg trial. In his opening address, he stated that what we were going to do was identify a few bad actors and hold them to account on behalf of the population that was complicit. Does that sound like a scapegoat to you? Right? Where was the accountability for the pharmacy at Walgreens that lined people up for the shot? Where was the accountability for the employer that said you can't come to work without the shot? Where was the accountability for all these things? And the answer is, we're going to play the game that says that if we get Barrick and Fauci, somehow we covered the bases?
Brilliant.
Heck no. Every single person who coerced, every single person who mandated, every single person who administered, every single person who said that you can't come to my restaurant, my cruise line, my hotel, my cab, my Uber,
My church.
every single person who said you can't take the Eucharist without a mask on, every one of them is equally culpable. Not more or less. And what I've said many times is the only model that we've scratched the surface of, and I don't think it's a good model, but it's the only model I've ever seen that we scratched the surface of, is actually the model that was put in place at the end of apartheid in South Africa, which was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, what I love about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as a model is this. You cannot exonerate culpability without a confession of culpability. You can't do it. If you don't see that what you did was wrong, and if you don't own the wrongness of the thing you did, then there's no way you can ever exonerate what you did. So that means that you have to actually not only say, I know, I'm an employer, I'm a hospitality person, whatever. I did a thing that was wrong. For that, I now accept responsibility and this is where the Truth and Reconciliation Commission failed in South Africa, I bear the responsibility of an old Crown law principle, and this goes back to the 13th century, which says that under fraudulent conveyance or fraudulent inducement, your job is to return the damaged party to its pre-damaged condition. Okay? That's the legal standard. So what we should be asking for is actually not just accountability, not just the I'm sorry, which, by the way, look at how I'm sorry has gone for the Aboriginals in Australia. How's the I'm sorry campaign gone?
Yeah, it ain't working
You know what?
so well.
There's still diabetics that are drunk and living on the edge of poverty and living in horrible conditions. And every time a politician gets up and does the I'm standing on these traditional lands, paying
Thank
homage
you.
to the elders past and present. No, you're not. You're a pompous, self-absorbed windbag who's actually still not giving a rip about the fact that you took the land so that you could raise sheep. That's what you are. But the point is that we can't just do truth and reconciliation. We have to do restitution. We have to find a pathway that says that there was harm done and that harm needs to be remediated. And that includes, and this is the part that's most controversial, disgorgement of all profits. All profits. That means that every dollar that was an incentive for a COVID test, every dollar that was an incentive for a vaccination, every dollar that was an incentive for anything else, every single dollar that was incentivized must be repaid. And if that doesn't happen, we don't have justice. So what did I just do? I made everybody squirm and be uncomfortable. Because that means all of us have an inner process that we have to do that then gives rise to calling for an integrity-filled process, not justice that is mob justice. This is about justice that has restitution and the notion that somehow or another we are returning the society, the individual, the aggrieved, and the harmed back to a pre-harmed state. And that ultimately means that we're going to have a whole new mission here at Church of Glad Tidings.
Can I add something else?
What does that mean? That means that we're going to have to do something really difficult. We're going to have to do something that says that we haven't been prepared for this in human civilization, and we're going to have to start now, and that is we're going to have orphans out the yin-yang. This is not a soon-to-be. This is a really soon-to-be. Because it turns out that when you look at excess deaths and you look at 20 to 40-year-olds as the place where the excess deaths are increasing the fastest, that means right now there's going to be a lot of kids that aren't going to have parents. So you know what that means? We need to be preparing today. This is the rain coming, and we need to build an ark. But in this case, we need to build an armada of arks. Because the armada of arks is we need to be ready to catch a whole bunch of kids whose parents are not going to make it. And you know what we're not doing right now? We're not doing that. So I'm saying that the accountability and the justice means that sometimes we're going to have to dig deep. And we're going to have to say, before all the justice is served, we have to be prepared to be just. We have to be prepared to be merciful. And we have to be prepared to step into a place where we might not have all the answers on the outside done yet when we have to deliver the goods on the inside. And I'll tell you what, the kids are the ones we need to focus on right now because they're the ones that are going to bear the brunt of this. So that's a long answer and not what you asked.
I wanted to add something.
I'm sorry?
I wanted to add something.
And Kim's adding.
I wanted to add something to that. And I've spoken about it and touched on it here at the church before when I've spoken and other times where I've kind of gone down this path. Imagine the scenario of them going off to jail. Most people who have gone along with the narrative and things like that would just go, after a little while, they just want to go back to normal, as we know, as quick as possible. So imagine if that scenario played out and then we're all going, but, you know, what about? And they would just be going, okay, and to go back into their normal lives, nothing would change at all. And so there's that piece. So it hasn't been painful enough. We all know that if we don't face things, it gets painfuler and more painfuler and, you know, more lessons come in a more harsh way till we wake the hell up. They haven't woken up, unfortunately, a lot of people. Some have, some are beginning to, some will never, just is in his condition. But important part is, think about when they were needing 80% of people to get the jab. They wanted 80% of us, population, to get the jab. Now, why would that be? It would be because if 80% get it, the other 20% do the, you know, whatever's in it, and frequency things, we may as well all have. We've all heard of shedding and getting effects by being around people who've had it. We've all had our own experience of that. If 80% had, you know, it would be very horrific for the rest of us because we would take on a lot of the side effects and different things. That didn't happen. So hence, you know, they're clutching at straws, they're overreaching, they're just being too bold, too big for their boots, they're clutching at all these sorts of straws. They didn't think there'd be enough of us that would say no. And there is. And then another really important thing, which I've been in the beginnings of a pondering on.
There you go, beginnings of a pondering. I love those.
Is I said, it's interesting that a lot of people who've measured things like great people who are wise at the moment are out there, the Greg Braden and others, they're talking about this 1% of a population that would be a tipping point. If 1% of people with pure hearts, you know, stood up, we raised our frequency and we said, no, just 1%. And I said, that's interesting that 1% of people with light in them or pure hearts or are standing up can actually, they need 80% to tip us the other way. We need 1%. We're going to win this. 1%.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are past 3 o'clock. And what I'm going to, oh yeah, you had your hand up. So one more here, and then I wanted to just say well, Lori, do yours, and then I'll say what I'm going to say.
Kind of question, kind of a statement, because I've known you for a couple of years now. When I did 12 senses, it changed my life every level I hear. You touched on your teachings.
Yeah.
When we're doing 12 senses again, is 12 senses sold out? Because isn't there another course that these guys can go to?
So if you advance to the last slide, which is a pathetic self-promotion, and we didn't plan this one, But the last slide is we do have the 12 Senses workshop. It is coming up in Boulder, January. What is it, Kim?
19 to
19 to
23.
23.
Cheryl and Dave are going to be there.
And we're doing the 12 Senses workshop. What this is to reactivate all of your brain. And it's something where, what we do is we try to go through a process, and it's something I've taught people many times in different ways. This is a new way that we do it. We did the first one last year, this format. But in the 4.5 days, we get all of your brain wiring kicked back on. The first day and a half is a very difficult process because I actually take you through the systematic erasure of all 12 intelligences. Who did it, when they did it, how they did it. So you get the backstory of when you lost the thing that you don't know you have. And then we go through a series of laboratories where the laboratories turn them all back on. It is a very painful process for some people because you find out how much of your life you've lost by not knowing what you didn't know. Like you didn't know that your vagus nerve, because it's the longest nerve in your cranial nerves, that goes down your back, innervates all of your viscera, all your abdomen, everything else, what a lot of people call the sense of intuition, operates at a 6 to 8 hertz frequency. It turns out, you know what they found out when they made cathedrals?
6 to 8 hertz.
6 to 8 hertz. You walk in there, you're actually picking up a frequency which actually gives you the feeling of transcendence because they actually knew that. So somebody actually turned that off and decided the way we communicate is 60 hertz 200 years ago. Isn't that interesting? So we go through all that. We go through the whole process. We reactivate all 12 cranial nerves. We go through the methodology of doing that. There are, I don't know, because I don't pay attention to this. There are a couple spaces, I think, left, but I don't know how it's going. But
there are some spaces.
But there are some, and if you go on and try to touch base with people to figure out whether you can come, if you say that you are here, we might find somebody who knows somebody who could go. We'll nudge a couple more people in the room. But the fact of the matter is what we care about is actually getting people operating with all of their faculties. Because the minute you have all of your faculties operating, then it's much harder to be duped. Much, much harder. But I want to just end with this. And then I'm going to let Kim actually have the last word. Kim was wondering if we would have stuff to fill 5 hours.
I was. Oh my God, what can we talk about?
How did it go?
Yeah, we could keep going for a long time.
Think you got it?
Yeah.
I'm so grateful because you guys don't know that you're part of a thing for us. For the last 3.5 years, my voice has been very loud, and it's been heard around the world a lot of ways. I'm very grateful for that. There is a phase when that was the appropriate thing to do. And this was the beginning of something new, which is Kim and I are convinced that we have had one of the most knockdown, drag-out, high-intensity kind of interactions of two people that you can imagine. Some of it's been the nicest, most beautiful, transcendent gloriousness, and some of it has been, just two cats fighting in the street late at night, making a lot of noise. And we've done that. But we know that what we're doing and what we're building is not for us. It's for us, collectively. We think that there's going to be an opportunity and a need as we go forward to start rebuilding the way humans interact with each other generally and the way men and women interact with each other specifically. We think that we need some new models about that. And one of the things that this event was actually kind of us breaking the bottle of champagne on the next ship that's sailing. What we want to do is we want to work with people in a way that's not the self-help kind of way. It's actually the kind of way where you actually, like I said about education, you actually have really honest conversations where you can ask hard questions and you get honest answers. Not BS answers, not the things that you're supposed to get after you have things sorted out, because we still don't have all of our stuff sorted out. But we think that it's really important that we're going to have to come up with a new voice around how men and women work together, and we want to make sure that that happens. And so this event, in many respects, was a dry run of what's coming in the next year. And so I'm super grateful, as my last statement, that you sat on this stage and shone far brighter than any words I would ever have to say. And it is my honor to do that with you.
Thank you, darling. Thank you.
So now you get the last word.
All right, look out, I've got the last word. On creating a better humanity, and we're talking about it has to start with yourself, and a big, big energy and a great frequency raising thing, energy is gratitude. And I think if you start your day and end your day in some form of gratitude is just so, so important, and David taught me that, and it's a great, great practice. So today I'd love to give gratitude, of course, to all of you that are here today. I did my first speech by myself roughly a year ago here in the big thing at the COVID con thing, and I really enjoyed it, and that was I just love how I got to do that here, being held in the space of all of your love here, and all the support. Like, what a place to do it. So I'm very, very grateful for that. I'm grateful that you have my lion in the other room there. I'm grateful for you both and all of your team of awesome people here, which are friends, deeply cherished friends. And I just think I'm just so grateful to have you guys in our life. And next year, I would love to make sure we factor in and visiting a lot more and just hanging out and doing friend stuff and that kind of thing that just makes you light up. And just, I always enjoy your company and the stories we share, and it's just lights me up more than anything. As David had said before, we came back just from London and came pretty much near straight here, and at first I was exhausted, but then as soon as Dave picked us up and I saw Cheryl, I had the light of 1,000 suns in me and all the energy in the world, and I knew right here, right now is where I wanted to be, and I was energized just by being around these guys. And just on all the stories I've been sharing about trusting impulses when they come up for you. So I had an impulse when we were visiting, because we were originally doing the rodeo next week, celebrate Dave's birthday and just have some fun. I said to David, wouldn't it be nice if we did some sort of fundraiser? It was just an inspiration I had, and I acted on it. Just doing those kinds of things. Like, if you see someone or something you can do, don't overthink it. Just go and do it. Like, this will raise possibly around $20,000, if not more. Like how awesome is that? Like, just really, really, really cool. So do those beautiful things. Have gratitude. And I also want to have gratitude for all the women in my life that have come before me that didn't make it, that didn't have what I have right now. For some lucky reason, I was born with the strength and resilience, and I refined it. I've been through hell, yes, but I still was born with something special. And you all have that. And it's like I feel them all with me. They give me what they can and their energy and their wisdom, and I learn from them. That no energy is ever destroyed, and all energy is with you, and it's part of me. As I said earlier, emotional things, everything that's come before you makes you you. So I'm grateful for them. I'm very grateful for my daughter for actually being the first expression of non-abused woman in my family, and for taking the baton and just being a little rock star. And you know, she's still, of course, learning and having a little work in progress, but finding that space as parents of letting her go on her journey, but still doing that guidance. As we all know, that sometimes is challenging, letting them kind of fall a little bit when you tell them that will happen if you do that, and they go, have to experience it. That kind of thing is, you know, it's enjoyable and challenging. Most of all, I wanted to really thank you, my husband David, because a really interesting thing that I've been able to articulate is that for a woman to rise, they have to have a strong man, because we need someone to literally hold us. And I have an analogy like, in all of our challenges and things like that, we need to know there's big, strong arms around us, kind of like a cocoon, so the butterfly can come out when we're ready, but we need to be held for a period. And we also need to see them, have them know of where we're at this point, and help us through their voice, because if we keep going, you know, if it comes just from a woman all the time, that we have these challenges, if a man goes, oh, I see it too, I can be a strong man, and if he teaches other men through example how to be strong, because there's all sorts of confusion about, you know, how does a man be? They have their own struggles and feelings and things like that aren't allowed, and we're all learning and growing together, and it's not a blame thing of each other. It's actually going, you know, how can we be our best versions and help each other? How can my gifts help David? How can his gifts help me? And for me to be here today, in this moment, where I'm at, and who knows where I'll go and what else I'll do, but we're living in the present moment, and I wouldn't be here now doing this without the strong arms and support of my man. So thank you.
Thank you all, and we will see you at what time tonight? Dave, what time? What time tonight? What 7 o'clock tonight, if you want a little bit more. 7 o'clock tonight. Thank you all for being here. Have a beautiful, beautiful day.
Again for Dave and Kim. That was wonderful.